Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one holding the truth. The words echoed through Ava Johnson's mind as she sat alone in the last row of St. Mark's Church on a gray autumn morning in Boston. The funeral service for Eleanor Whitmore had drawn some of the most influential people in the city. Business leaders, politicians, charity directors, and members of the wealthy Whitmore family filled the polished wooden pews. Ava felt completely out of place among them. At 16 years old, she had no fortune, no powerful last name, and no clear reason for being there beyond the simple fact that Eleanor had always insisted she attend every major event connected to her foundation. For years, Ava had never fully understood why. Eleanor Whitmore had been different from everyone else. While others saw Ava as just another teenager from a modest neighborhood, Eleanor always greeted her warmly, remembered details about her life, and asked thoughtful questions about school, volunteering, and future goals. Yet whenever Ava tried to ask why she received such special attention, Eleanor would simply smile and say, "One day, everything will make sense." Now that day seemed impossible because Eleanor was gone. As the service continued, speakers took turns describing Eleanor's accomplishments. They talked about billion-dollar companies, charitable donations, and awards that filled entire walls of her mansion. Yet Ava noticed something strange. None of them spoke about the personal kindness Eleanor showed when nobody was watching. None of them mentioned the handwritten notes she sent to struggling students or the hours she spent visiting community centers. When the service finally ended, groups of mourners slowly moved outside beneath a cloudy sky. Long black vehicles waited near the curb. Family members gathered together while guests exchanged quiet conversations. Ava expected to return home, but before she could leave, a tall man approached her. It was Michael Bennett, Eleanor's longtime attorney. "Miss Johnson," he said politely, "Mrs. Whitmore requested your presence at the mansion this afternoon." Ava blinked in surprise. "Mine?" Michael nodded. "Specifically yours." Confused but curious, Ava agreed. An hour later, she found herself standing inside the enormous Whitmore estate overlooking the harbor. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the grand foyer. Family portraits lined the walls. Wealth and history seemed embedded into every corner of the mansion. Relatives gathered in the formal sitting room, while Michael prepared several folders and a small wooden box on a large table. Ava quietly took a seat near the back. She noticed a few family members glancing toward her with confusion. Some clearly wondered why she was there at all. Then Michael cleared his throat and addressed the room. "Before we discuss the estate, Mrs. Whitmore left one final instruction." The room became silent. Michael placed his hand on the wooden box. "Everything begins with an envelope that has remained sealed for 16 years. The room remained silent after Michael Bennett's announcement. Several members of the Whitmore family exchanged confused looks, while others stared directly at the small wooden box resting in the center of the table. Ava Johnson sat quietly near the back, wishing she could disappear. She had no idea why a sealed envelope from 16 years ago had anything to do with her. Richard Whitmore, Eleanor's oldest son, finally broke the silence. "What does an old envelope have to do with settling the estate?" he asked. His voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in every room. Michael remained calm. Mrs. Whitmore was very clear. Before any discussion of assets, properties, or investments, this matter must be addressed first. The attorney unlocked the wooden box and carefully lifted the lid. Inside were neatly organized folders, several photographs, and a single yellowed envelope protected inside a transparent sleeve. Ava immediately noticed something unusual. The envelope looked old, but it had clearly been preserved with extraordinary care. Michael removed it slowly and placed it on the table. Every person in the room leaned forward. The attorney turned the envelope so everyone could see the front. Written across it in elegant blue ink were two words: Ava Johnson. A ripple of whispers spread across the room. Ava felt her stomach tighten. She had never seen the envelope before. She knew Eleanor's handwriting from birthday cards and scholarship notes sent over the years. The writing on the envelope was unquestionably hers. "That cannot be right," Catherine Whitmore said quietly. "How old is that envelope?" Michael glanced at the date written in the corner. 16 years. The whispers grew louder. Ava was only 16 years old. Richard frowned. "You were telling us my mother prepared that envelope when this girl was a baby?" Michael nodded. "Yes. The room fell silent again. Ava could barely process what she was hearing. She remembered meeting Eleanor for the first time when she was 10 years old through a community leadership program. Before that, she had never heard the Whitmore name. Yet somehow Eleanor had prepared an envelope bearing her name years before their official introduction. Michael opened another folder from the box. Inside were several documents signed by Eleanor. He read one sentence aloud. "The envelope must remain sealed until the day of my funeral. It must be opened only by Ava Johnson in the presence of my family." Richard stood up. "Why?" Michael looked down at the paperwork. "There is an answer to that question. Mrs. Whitmore left instructions explaining everything. However, those instructions may only be read after Ava opens the envelope." Every eye turned toward her. Ava suddenly felt the weight of the entire room pressing against her shoulders. Michael carefully picked up the envelope and walked toward her. The attorney stopped beside her chair and gently placed it into her hands. The paper felt surprisingly heavy. On the back, beneath the seal, Eleanor had written one final sentence. As Ava read the words, her heart nearly stopped. The message said, "The truth begins here." The words on the back of the envelope seemed to echo inside Ava Johnson's mind. The truth begins here. For a moment, she simply stared at the faded paper resting in her hands. Around her, the Whitmore family remained silent. Even the people who had spent the last hour questioning her presence appeared unable to look away. Michael Bennett gave a small nod. "Whenever you are ready." Ava carefully slid her finger beneath the seal. The paper opened with a soft crackling sound. Inside was a folded letter and a photograph. The photograph slipped free first and landed gently on her lap. The instant Ava saw it, confusion swept across her face. It showed a younger Eleanor Whitmore standing beside a smiling woman holding a newborn baby wrapped in a pale blanket. Eleanor looked almost 20 years younger. The woman beside her had warm eyes and a familiar smile. Ava felt something stir inside her memory, even though she knew she had never seen the image before. Across the room, Richard Whitmore frowned. "Who was that?" Michael stepped closer and examined the photograph. His expression changed immediately. "I have never seen this picture." Ava slowly turned it over. Written on the back in Eleanor's handwriting were 6 simple words. "Never stop searching for her." The room became completely still. Catherine Whitmore covered her mouth. Richard stared at the photograph. Michael looked toward the folders inside the wooden box. Ava's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. The paper had yellowed with age, but the writing remained clear. She began reading aloud. "If you are reading this, then 16 years have passed exactly as I hoped they would." Ava swallowed hard and continued. "The child holding this letter may not yet understand why she has received it. That is because some promises require patience." Confused glances spread around the room. Ava kept reading. "Today marks the end of a search that began long before you could remember. For years I followed clues, records, and memories because I made a promise to someone very important." Richard suddenly leaned forward. "A promise to who?" Michael raised a hand. "Let her continue." Ava nodded and returned to the letter. "The woman in the photograph trusted me with something precious. Before our paths separated, she asked me to do one thing. She asked me to find her daughter if circumstances ever prevented her from doing so herself." Ava's heart pounded. The room seemed smaller with every sentence. She continued, "For many years I feared I had failed. Then one day I found the person I had been searching for." A sharp silence followed those words. Every eye moved toward Ava. Michael slowly opened another folder from the box. Several documents lay inside, each bearing Eleanor's signature. The attorney scanned the first page. His face lost color. Then he looked directly at Ava. "There is more," he said quietly. "Much more." Michael Bennett carefully removed the first document from the folder. The paper appeared worn from years of handling, yet Eleanor Whitmore's signature remained clear at the bottom. Ava Johnson watched as the attorney read silently for several seconds. The longer he looked at the page, the more serious his expression became. "This document was written 12 years ago," Michael finally said. Richard Whitmore crossed his arms. "Then read it." Michael nodded and began. "I have finally located the child I promised to find. She is healthy, safe, and completely unaware of the search that has occupied so much of my life." Ava felt her breath catch. Every person in the room immediately turned toward her. Michael continued reading. "For now, I will remain a distant observer. The child deserves the freedom to become herself without the burden of knowing why she is being watched. Catherine Whitmore shook her head slowly. My mother spent years searching for someone and never told us. Michael reached for another document, apparently much longer than any of us realized. He opened the second report. Attached to it was a photograph of Ava at a community leadership event when she was 10 years old. Ava recognized the picture instantly. It had been taken during the first day she met Eleanor. Michael read another note written by Eleanor. She reminds me of her mother every day. The same kindness, the same determination, the same habit of helping others before helping herself. Silence filled the room. Ava stared at the photograph. She remembered Eleanor introducing herself that afternoon. She had assumed the billionaire simply enjoyed supporting young people. Now every memory seemed different. Michael removed another page. Over the next several years, I will continue observing from a distance. If character truly reveals itself through action, then time will tell me everything I need to know. Richard frowned. Observing? Michael nodded. There are annual reports. He opened another folder. Inside were summaries documenting volunteer work, academic achievements, and community projects. None of them felt invasive. They read more like the proud observations of a mentor than an investigation. Ava's eyes widened as she realized Eleanor had quietly followed her progress for years. Michael turned to the most recent report. Subject continues to demonstrate exceptional empathy and leadership. Recommendation unchanged. She remains the strongest example of the values I hope to preserve. Catherine looked confused. Recommendation for what? Michael glanced toward the remaining files. That answer appears to be in the next folder. He opened it carefully. Inside was a sealed packet labeled Confidential Final Verification. Beneath it sat another photograph. This one immediately captured everyone's attention. The image showed Eleanor standing beside the same woman from the first photograph. The newborn baby remained in her arms. Written underneath was a date from 16 years earlier and a single handwritten sentence. Michael read it aloud. If I ever find her daughter, she must know the truth. The handwritten sentence beneath the photograph seemed to freeze the room in place. If I ever find her daughter, she must know the truth. Ava Johnson stared at the image resting on the table. The woman beside Eleanor Whitmore looked familiar in a way she could not explain. It was not recognition. It was something deeper, something emotional that tugged at memories she could not fully reach. Michael Bennett carefully lifted the sealed packet labeled Confidential Final Verification. The attorney examined the signatures across the front before opening it. Several documents slid onto the table. The first contained notes written entirely by Eleanor. Michael began reading aloud. 16 years ago, I met a young woman named Angela Johnson during one of our community outreach programs. She possessed extraordinary kindness despite facing difficult circumstances. We became friends very quickly. Ava's eyes widened. Johnson, the same last name. Michael continued. Angela often spoke about her infant daughter. Every conversation eventually returned to the same subject. She wanted her child to have opportunities she never received. Richard Whitmore leaned forward. You are saying the woman in the photograph was Angela Johnson? Michael nodded. According to these records, yes. Ava felt her heart pounding. Her mother's name had been Angela Johnson. She had grown up hearing stories from relatives about a mother she barely remembered. Michael continued reading. Several months after this photograph was taken, Angela faced serious challenges that forced her family to relocate. During that period, communication became difficult. Before we lost contact, she asked me for one promise. If circumstances ever separated her from her daughter, I would find the child and make certain she knew she was loved. The room remained silent. Ava slowly lowered her eyes. Every word seemed impossible and yet strangely familiar. Michael opened another document. For years I searched without success. Records disappeared. Addresses changed. Information became outdated. Eventually, I feared I would never fulfill my promise. He turned the page. Then, 6 years later, I discovered a lead connecting Angela's daughter to a school scholarship application. Ava immediately remembered receiving a scholarship funded by the Whitmore Foundation. Michael continued. The moment I saw her name, I knew the search was over. Catherine Whitmore looked stunned. Mother knew who Ava was all these years. Apparently, Michael replied. Ava struggled to process everything she was hearing. The foundation scholarship, the invitations, the mentorship programs, Eleanor's unusual interest in her life. Suddenly, every piece began fitting together. Michael then removed one final report from the packet. His expression changed immediately. "This is the verification document." Richard frowned. "Verification of what?" Michael looked directly at Ava before answering. "Verification that she is the child Eleanor spent 16 years trying to find." A stunned silence filled the room. Then Michael turned to the final page. His eyes moved slowly across the text. When he finished reading, he looked up with visible surprise. "There is something else here," he said quietly. "Something Eleanor never told anyone." The words lingered in the air. Something Eleanor never told anyone. Nobody in the Whitmore mansion seemed willing to breathe. Ava Johnson sat motionless, her eyes fixed on Michael Bennett. The attorney looked down at the final page once more as if making certain he had read it correctly. Richard Whitmore finally broke the silence. "What is it?" Michael carefully placed the verification report on the table. According to Eleanor's own notes, finding Ava was only part of the reason she continued following her progress. Confusion spread across the room. Ava felt her heart beating faster. Michael opened a smaller folder hidden beneath the verification documents. Inside were several handwritten pages dated over the past 6 years. He selected the first note and began reading. "The search officially ended today. However, I have discovered something unexpected. The child I spent years trying to find possesses the same qualities that made her mother unforgettable." Michael paused before continuing. "Compassion without recognition. Integrity without reward. Kindness without expectation." Catherine lowered her eyes. Richard remained silent. Michael opened another page. "I originally intended to fulfill a promise and then step away. Instead, I found myself becoming invested in the young woman she was becoming." Ava felt a lump form in her throat. She remembered Eleanor attending scholarship ceremonies, volunteer events, and leadership programs. At the time, she assumed the billionaire treated every student that way. Now she realized those encounters carried far more meaning. Michael continued reading. "Each year confirms the same conclusion. Ava consistently chooses what is right even when nobody is watching." He removed another report. "Community service evaluations. Academic references. Leadership observations. Personal interviews." The documents covered several years. None of them focused on achievements alone. They focused on character. Ava could hardly believe what she was hearing. Michael turned to the final handwritten note. The room became quiet once more. This entry was written only 4 months ago. He began reading aloud. "Many people believe legacy is measured by money. They are wrong. Wealth can be inherited. Character cannot. If I leave behind anything meaningful, it must be entrusted to someone who understands the value of serving others." Richard slowly looked toward Ava. For the first time all evening, his expression no longer carried skepticism. Michael continued. "My family expects discussions about ownership. They will likely focus on numbers. I hope they eventually understand that my greatest concern has never been preserving wealth. It has been preserving values." A long silence followed. Then Michael reached the bottom of the page. His eyes widened again. "There is an attachment." He carefully unfolded another sheet hidden behind the note. At the top appeared Eleanor's signature. Beneath it was a title written in bold letters. "Final Personal Declaration." Michael scanned the first paragraph. His expression immediately changed. "This explains everything," he said quietly. Ava swallowed hard. "Everything about what?" Michael looked directly at her before answering. "Everything about why Eleanor chose you." Michael Bennett carefully unfolded the final personal declaration and placed it on the table. The room remained completely silent. Ava Johnson sat frozen in her chair, while every member of the Whitmore family watched the attorney. Michael adjusted his glasses and began reading. "If this document is being read, then Ava has already learned the truth about the promise I made to her mother many years ago." Ava lowered her eyes for a moment. Hearing those words made everything feel more real. The photograph, the letters, the years of searching, none of it had been an accident. Michael continued. "However, there is another truth that must be shared. The promise explains how I found Ava. It does not explain why I chose to keep her in my life." Richard Whitmore leaned forward. Catherine sat motionless beside him. Michael turned the page. "For 6 years I observed Ava's growth through scholarships, community programs, leadership events, and personal conversations. At first I believed I was honoring a promise. Over time I realized something else was happening. Ava was teaching me." Confused expressions appeared around the room. Michael continued reading. She reminded me of values that success often causes people to forget. She treated every person with dignity regardless of status. She gave credit to others. She accepted responsibility. Most importantly, she remained kind when kindness offered no reward. Ava felt tears forming in her eyes. Michael opened another page. Many people spend their lives pursuing influence. Very few spend their lives deserving it. Ava never knew she was being evaluated, which is precisely why her actions mattered. The room remained silent except for Michael's voice. He reached the next section. Members of my family may wonder why I devoted so much attention to someone outside our bloodline. The answer is simple. Character is not inherited through genetics. Character is revealed through choices. Richard slowly lowered his gaze. Catherine quietly wiped away a tear. Michael continued. During the past 6 years, I created a private set of observations. Every year produced the same conclusion. Ava consistently demonstrated the values I hoped would survive beyond my lifetime. Michael paused before turning to the final page. At the top appeared Eleanor's signature once again. Beneath it was a paragraph highlighted in blue ink. Michael read slowly. After extensive reflection, I have reached a decision. The future of the Whitmore Community Legacy Initiative will not be determined by inheritance rights, family expectations, or financial influence. Several relatives exchanged nervous glances. Michael continued. The individual I trust most to represent the principles behind this organization is Ava Johnson. A stunned silence followed. Ava could barely breathe. Richard stared at the document. Catherine looked toward Ava in disbelief. Michael lowered the page but did not close the file. There is still one final attachment, he said quietly. According to Eleanor's instructions, this is the most important document in the entire box. He carefully reached into the folder and removed a sealed letter addressed only to Ava. On the front, written in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting, were 7 words. For Ava, when you finally understand. The letter seemed heavier than any document Ava Johnson had held that day. For Ava, when you finally understand. The words written on the front immediately filled the room with anticipation. Michael Bennett carefully handed the envelope to her. Unlike the first envelope, this one looked newer. The paper was crisp. The handwriting was steady. Eleanor Whitmore had clearly written it during the final years of her life. Ava stared at the seal for several seconds before carefully opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter folded 3 times. The room remained silent as she unfolded the pages. You should read it aloud, Michael said gently. Ava nodded and took a slow breath. Dear Ava, she began. If you are reading this, then you now know about the promise I made to your mother. However, there is something even more important that I need you to understand. Ava paused briefly before continuing. For years, I believed I was searching for a child because of a promise. The truth is that the search changed me as much as it changed you. Richard Whitmore lowered his eyes. Catherine listened carefully. Ava continued reading. When I finally found you, I expected closure. Instead, I found purpose. I watched a young person choose kindness when nobody required it. I watched you help others when there was no reward. I watched you remain humble while achieving things many adults struggle to accomplish. Tears formed in Ava's eyes. She continued. The world often celebrates talent, wealth, and success. Those things are useful, but they are not what matters most. Character matters most. The room remained completely still. Many people inherit money. Very few inherit trust. During the past 6 years, I have asked myself one question repeatedly. If I could preserve only one thing after I am gone, what would it be? Ava swallowed hard. The answer was never my companies. It was never my investments. It was never my estate. The answer was the values that guided my life. Several members of the Whitmore family shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ava continued reading. That is why I chose you. Not because of a promise. Not because of sympathy. Not because of circumstance. I chose you because you earned my trust without ever knowing you were being observed. A tear rolled down Ava's cheek. Michael quietly placed a box of tissues nearby. She continued. The Whitmore Community Legacy Initiative will continue helping students, families, and neighborhoods long after I am gone. Official leadership will remain with professional trustees until you become an adult. However, I have asked the board to include your voice in every major decision. They already know this. Ava stopped and looked up in surprise. Michael nodded slowly. It is true. She returned to the final paragraph. One day, people may ask why I place such confidence in a young woman who shared neither my name nor my background. Tell them the truth. Character is not measured by where someone begins. Character is measured by the choices they make. And you made the right choices. Ava reached the final line, and her voice nearly broke. You were never the end of a promise. You were always the beginning of a legacy. The final words of Eleanor Whitmore's letter lingered in the room long after Ava Johnson finished reading them. You were never the end of a promise. You were always the beginning of a legacy. Silence settled over the mansion. Nobody seemed willing to speak first. The documents, photographs, and letters that had filled the table now felt different. They were no longer pieces of a mystery. They were pieces of a life Eleanor had carefully protected for 16 years. Ava slowly lowered the letter into her lap. Her eyes moved across the room. Earlier that afternoon, many people had questioned why she was even present. Now those same people looked at her with expressions of reflection, humility, and respect. Michael Bennett carefully gathered several folders together before addressing the room. Mrs. Whitmore left one final instruction for the family. Richard Whitmore looked up. There is still more? Michael nodded. Only one sentence. He opened the final page of Eleanor's records and began reading. My family may spend years discussing what I built. I hope they spend even more time discussing why I built it. The attorney lowered the page. Nobody spoke. Richard remained seated for several moments before finally standing. Ava expected another question. Instead, he slowly walked toward her side of the table. I think I understand now, he said quietly. Ava looked up. Richard glanced toward the photograph of Eleanor hanging above the fireplace. My mother was never searching for someone to inherit money. He paused. She was searching for someone she could trust. Catherine nodded from across the room. Several other relatives quietly agreed. For the first time all evening, the conversation was no longer about wealth, ownership, or expectations. It was about character. Michael closed the wooden box and secured the remaining documents inside. The mystery that had begun with a sealed envelope had finally reached its conclusion. Yet the answer was not what anyone expected. Ava had not discovered a hidden fortune. She had discovered something far more valuable. She had learned why Eleanor never stopped believing in her. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows overlooking Boston Harbor. Warm light spread across the room. Ava looked once more at the letter resting in her hands. The promise Eleanor made to Angela Johnson had been fulfilled. The search had ended. The truth had been revealed. Yet a new chapter was only beginning. The Whitmore Community Legacy Initiative would continue serving students, families, and neighborhoods throughout the city. And for the first time, Ava understood why Eleanor wanted her involved in that future. Not because of a photograph, not because of a promise, not because of history, because every choice she made had quietly proven who she was. Michael carried the wooden box toward the study where it would be archived. Family members slowly began leaving the room. Ava remained seated for a moment longer beneath Eleanor's portrait. The billionaire who had changed her life was gone. But her lesson remained. Wealth could build buildings. Influence could open doors. Success could attract attention. Yet character was the one thing powerful enough to outlive them all. And as Ava finally stood and prepared to leave the mansion, she realized that was the true inheritance Eleanor had chosen to leave behind.